I do want to talk about compliance and governance at MuleSoft. I lost the Comcast folks, but I feel like it actually is a good segue from there, so there is some overlap. Although I feel like you guys made it sound way easier to get some of these compliance things than it was definitely my experience, so maybe kudos to you. We've heard a number of talks that have to do with things like APT and threat hunting and a few of the more exciting parts of doing information security. This is not one of those. This is a little bit more mundane. Compliance is maybe a necessary evil. No offense to any compliance folks out there. But it is not quite as exciting as some of the incident response stuff. So we live in, obviously a highly regulated environment. It feels like every day there's something new. And the most recent one for us, of course, is the California laws that just got passed. There's always something going on. And even when we're not in an incident, we're still under compliance regulatory requirements. So I want to talk a little bit about some of those operations and detective controls. So my name is Chris Byron. I'm the Platform Security Director at MuleSoft. I am trained as an engineer. I'm definitely still more of an engineer than I am a security operator. That'll probably be obvious in a moment. If everybody's digested that. Just a couple of other disclaimers. There's some of the stuff that I'm going to say might not actually be reality. Let's call it aspirational. Maybe how I wish some things were. I also put that up there to say that when I talk about an incident that we had, you won't know which parts of it are true and which parts of it aren't, so you can't exactly quote me. And also, my only experience with osquery is through upticks. And I apologize, but I don't actually know the difference between these two things. I know there's a lot of stuff that upticks adds on. I don't know what those things are. I only know upticks. So I'll say osquery, but you'll know what I actually mean. Sometimes you see those UPT underscore tables. I'm pretty sure those are uptick specific. Okay. Our agenda, just to give a little bit of background about MuleSoft and the coverage, on the architecture that we have and the coverage that we look for. Talk about how to achieve 100% osquery coverage. For us, it's kind of a requirement. And then a little bit of the compliance stuff as well. So just a short summary of MuleSoft, what MuleSoft actually does. Our marketing team gave me the blurb. The leading application network company. One of our other speakers said, oh yeah, MuleSoft, I know you guys, you're the API for APIs, which maybe it doesn't give you much more information, but it does tell you sort of at which abstraction layer we are operating. We were once upon a time classified as enterprise service bus. Now we say integration platform as a service and API management as a service, of course. And so those are sort of the main two products that we focus on. Like most platform as a service or infrastructure as a service companies, which we are, we have, maybe this is better on the next slide. We talk about our management or control plane, and we talk about our customer runtime or data plane. In this picture, you can see that our customers interact primarily with the management console. This is just like if you're logging into AWS console or something like that. And when you actually go to deploy something, you're deploying to what we would call the runtime plane. The management plane for us is made up of 50 or 60 services. This is where our engineers spend most of their time. These are the services that our engineers work on, develop, et cetera. But it only represents maybe 4,000 to 5,000 hosts. We're entirely in Amazon, so when I say physical hosts, I obviously don't mean physical hosts, but anyway, 4,000 to 5,000 hosts. The runtime plane where all of our customers deploy their applications is much larger, but much more homogeneous. So we have something around 100,000 runtimes right now. That number is growing all the time. I didn't draw a lot of the detail here, but the point here is that our customers design and store and share applications, then they deploy them. We also allow them to deploy runtimes to their own metal. That can be public cloud, their own data center, et cetera. Each of these runtimes is meant to encapsulate an API, an application, something like this. It's wrapping up a connection to a MySQL database over here and an SAP database over there and devices and other services, et cetera. And then our customers' customers interact with those APIs directly. So that's MuleSoft. In our runtime environment, which is primarily what I'm going to be talking about today, we have a lot of controls that protect our customers. We have network segmentation and logical segmentation, all these different things. So obviously that detail is not represented here. Okay, the first topic I want to talk about is getting to 100% of assets reporting in osquery. We had an incident over the summer that was fun because it resulted in MuleSoft's first CVE. Actually, Salesforce's first CVE, because Salesforce is cloud only, and now they own a company that does on-prem software. This was a vulnerability in our customer runtimes that allowed a directory traversal to read files off the host. So if you're running in our cloud, those files on the host would be, etc password, but it could include sensitive data that's part of the application itself. And if you're running on your own metal, I don't know what else is on your host, what other files are going to be on there. And so if you're running our applications on your machines, that directory traversal issue could be even worse than it is in our own cloud. Unfortunately, we can't run security tooling on your host, so I'm only really talking about our runtime environment. But we discovered this internally. We went and looked at what logs we had, and we said we have no evidence that this has ever been attempted anywhere in our environment, but we would like to be sure. We would like to go out and say, we can detect this thing. We would like to go back and say, at least in the past 6 months or something, or whatever logs we have, we would like to be able to say we have 100%. And because of the tooling that we had at the time, which was not osquery, we weren't able to say that. We weren't able to say definitively, we can tell when somebody reads etc password, or we can tell when somebody does a certain thing, opens a shell, or not opens a shell. It wasn't that kind of vulnerability, but reads sensitive data off the machine, but we didn't have that capability. And when we would talk to our customers, they didn't care about all the other customers. They only actually care about their machines, the ones that are running their applications. So if we have anything less than 100%, even if we had this capability, if we had said, we have 98% of our hosts are reporting, they said, okay, of those 2%, are mine in there? And if you can't tell me whether or not it's reading the sensitive data, then I need to go start rotating credentials. I need to go start changing all my keys. So that was the sort of one of the big impetus that we had that said we had to get to 100%. This is leading into the compliance portion as well. There's a number of challenges. Let's see. And even if we had the monitoring available, we had some monitoring, but it wouldn't have told us about the specific thing. So we also needed to expand the capabilities of the monitoring that we had. And there are some challenges here. We operate in about 50 or 60 AWS accounts. And so we care about all of them at some level. Some of them are more production, more important than others, but it's not as simple as just saying like one EC2 query is going to show us all of the instances. We have to look at a lot of them. A lot of different regions, et cetera. Because our product deploys instances and configures networks and stuff in AWS, we run into AWS API quotas really frequently. So if I want to go say, I want to get to 100%, let me query AWS and ask what instances are even out there. Even doing that query can actually be costly for us. If we do it too much, we can actually hurt our product's ability to deploy its own applications. And similarly, right now I mentioned we're on AWS, but that won't always be true. We recently announced that we're trying to move runtime fabrics into some other clouds. And then, of course, this isn't helpful for customers either. So just some of the challenges associated with inventorying, getting the inventory of all of our assets in AWS. So the goal is to be able to say, okay, here's all the assets that we know exist. Which ones are missing from osquery? For example, we have a huge inventory in Amazon. We have a huge inventory in our Upticks or our osquery. How do we actually make sure that these things line up? This isn't even actually reality for us. When I tried to get the screenshot, it just said you can't even view all your EC2 instances. So this is a constant thing that we have to worry about. But getting the inventory from AWS, I think you can probably imagine for yourself, maybe we'll leave that as an exercise for the reader, is possible, right? But one of the things that we found is we already are using, because of so many other security tools, we're already getting inventory from AWS into multiple other tools, whether it's for configuration management or just financial reporting, et cetera. And so what we ended up choosing is to query from those sources instead of querying directly from AWS. This means that we don't affect our runtime API quotas. And by doing that, we both save money and it gives us a little better uptime. And then we want to be able to query Upticks and actually get that inventory. But because we have, as I said, 6 figures of hosts at this point and growing, we have to figure out a way to uniquely identify and map up these things. So we tried a few different things. So the most obvious one is the EC2 instance metadata table. This was not something we knew existed at the beginning. We were playing around with a few different options, but once you see this one exists, it's pretty darn valuable. What you can see we're doing here is just querying for all the instance IDs, because obviously Amazon is going to tell me its instance IDs. And I'm also using some sharding here. I'm only, for example, in this query, I'm only looking at our QA environment, our QA AWS account. As a small feature request for upticks and/or osquery, it would be great to not have to do 2 casts and a JSON lookup and everything to be able to use my asset tags and queries, but that's what I did so far. So this gives us a list of instance IDs. The sharding is obviously valuable because we don't want to have to query AWS for the entire 100,000 at the same time. We want to be able to do this in multiple runs. Plus, I want to alert differently on them. Missing assets in production is a lot different from missing assets in our QA environment. This is actually how we're creating that auto tag, is also by querying the EC2 instance metadata table. Also by querying the instance metadata and just using the account ID. We did also play around with, because as you heard from a few other folks, there are OS query performance issues to always consider. There are other ways to figure out some of this information. And the EC2 instance metadata table is populated by, I believe, 7 actual queries on the host, about 7 curl requests to the EC2 metadata API, the 169.254 metadata API. So we can also hit it ourselves. Sorry for the color change there. We can also hit it ourselves if we want to reduce the number of queries. We can do it in 1 or 2 queries as well. But this is the same sort of information. So that's great if you're on Amazon. There's other ways to do this as well. The way that we actually started, and the way we may actually go back to as we move on to other cloud platforms, is doing it by IP address. Because of the way that we segment our network, we do end up having unique IP addresses for every single host. It's not a guarantee. It's not because they're all in the same network. It's just because of the way we split up our 10./8 blocks. And so we find that we can actually get unique IP addresses from these things. And of course, whatever inventory system we're using, whether it's AWS or Azure or SoftLayer or something like that, we can get that information as well. So just choosing it by IP address was also another way to get that. Okay, so as I said, actually doing the comparison, we do it twice a day because that's when our other tools are querying the Amazon APIs. We do it right after those other tools are querying those APIs, so we get freshest data. The upticks response, the response from our OS query is actually pretty real time, but the Amazon one is the much more expensive for us. And so we do it right after that. And we compare those lists, and for us, we alert to email and Slack. These aren't critical alerts, obviously. These are things that are like, hey, respond to it in the next day or 2, that kind of thing. Originally, it was the next day or 2. With our compliance requirements, we actually have to figure out exactly when the SLAs are so that we can both fix the issues, which hosts are not reporting, and we can solve some of the other things that depend on all of those hosts reporting, which I'll talk about next. I won't actually talk about the CIS benchmarks and the FedRAMP host settings. I think that the Comcast team did actually talk about those already. We do modify our CIS queries, and it's because different hosts have different exceptions to the CIS suite. If we look at all the benchmarks, we might say that for operational requirements or because of a vendor dependency, this set of hosts, this class of assets, doesn't have the same CIS requirements. So we do modify them. I heard that question. And we use asset tags to line those things up, as you might imagine. But I'm just going to talk about the third one here, the functional continuous monitoring, ConMon. Again, the Comcast team made FedRAMP sound so easy. It has been so hard for us, but we're making it work. So for FedRAMP, there's a number of really difficult requirements. We have to demonstrate that we're detecting things like intrusion, rerun, Nessus. We have to detect on vulnerabilities. We have to make sure that we're logging syslogs, error logs from applications, auth logs. All of that stuff has to be centralized. We use Sumo. That's just what we're using. It could be anything, Splunk or whatever. So we have to demonstrate those things. That we sit with the auditors, we demonstrate that. And then we have to also demonstrate that any failure of any of those systems is detected and responded to. So if our monitoring stops on a single host, if osquery stops running on a single host, if Nessus stops running on a single host. And then we have to take those alerts, and every single month we have to deliver the POAM, the report of those things, to every agency that we're working with, and say, here's all of the things that are currently missing, currently broken, currently failing. but they're all within SLA, 30 days for high issues and 90 days for mediums, et cetera. And here's our plan to remediate them. We have to do that every month. So these things add up to be a constant thing that we're like, there's no way to slip on this stuff. You can't show up to the agencies and say, oh yeah, we're missing 15% of our hosts aren't reporting into Sumo anymore, but don't worry, we'll get that fixed. No, you have to say exactly what your plan is and when it's going to be fixed every single time. And so we use osquery for this, of course. I've just shown how we can get confidence that we have osquery running on every single one of our hosts. And once we have osquery running everywhere, we can use that to make sure that we have our other controls. So that's why I'm saying I won't really talk about the host settings and the CIS benchmarks, but these other ones around continuous monitoring specifically, vulnerability management, log aggregation, we can use osquery to detect on that. Specifically, we can detect on the processes running, Sumo, in our case, the Sumo collector, the Nessus agent, et cetera. There's other ones as well, but those are the ones that I'm talking about. This is probably a little bit small, so I'll read it. It's probably evident to you at this point that you can query the processes table and you can say, show me where Nessus agent is running, show me where Sumo collector is running. We found that whether we're using windowed tables or we're using like time-stamped queries and showing me the most recent data, et cetera, we did have a few issues where we weren't getting notified very quickly when something wasn't working. The quality of the data was just shy of what we needed. And we found that we wanted to know, for example, the process could be flapping on and off, and sometimes we wouldn't know that it wasn't running because of the way that we're querying the process table. So we're still doing that. We're using the process table, but we're also using the ability here to create events based on the process being removed from the process table. I'll point to it here, but it says, from the processes table, the removed event, and we're looking at the name of the, in this case, the Sumo collector, the wrapper script, stopping. And we don't alert necessarily every single time that this happens, but if we see it happen and it doesn't come back on, or if we see it happening a lot on a particular host, that gives us something that we can say, okay, why is that particular host having so much issues running this tool? Which is, again, required. We have to show that it's running all the time. So this is a way that we were able to get to improve the quality of the data from just looking at one view. We look at it now from two different directions and make sure that we have that. Okay, that's actually my last slide. I want to close by saying maybe a couple of lessons that we've learned as part of this. Okay, the first thing is that obviously security and compliance aren't the same thing. Maybe it's best to say that compliance is not security. I think everybody probably knows that. I used to have a pretty good view of compliance as a thing that keeps us honest. It raises us in every area of security so that we're doing things, not only the most sexy parts of security, but also all of the other little stuff that you always have to do. Today, I think that the pendulum has swung too far. I think that we are overly subjected to various compliance regimes. I think that it can be really challenging to meet all of the compliance requirements, while actually the real focus of our job is supposed to be security. But the lesson for me is, if we build our security program based on incident response or based on just operating the security functionality first, the thing that is, hey, when we have an incident, oh, actually, I heard somebody yesterday, I can't recall who, say, if you can't say that you're not being compromised, then you have to kind of assume that you are compromised, or you have to kind of assume that you are under attack or in the middle of a breach. I would maybe turn that around a little bit if I'm building my program. The vast majority of the time, that's not true. We are actually just trying to operate the program. But 100% of the time, we are subject to compliance requirements. 100% of the time, we have regulatory needs. And so we actually have to build our program in a way that makes it so we can do those things really well. And then we can also add the ability to do incident response really well. We can also add the ability to do real intrusion detection really well. But if we do it the other way around, where we focus first on the stuff that's maybe the most exciting parts of security, we end up in a place where doing the mundane things are incredibly painful. Great, we're really good at making sure that none of our users are doing the wrong things, but we can't actually prove it. Then we end up paying a much higher cost in the day-to-day pain of just going to work, right, and dealing with the compliance requirements than if we had maybe turned that the other direction. The other lesson is, if you're a small company thinking about doing FedRAMP, I would recommend against it. I just can't really recommend doing that. Okay. that is all I have.